Stay with me, because no one lasted 24 hours in that house. The front door slammed so hard the glass panels trembled, and another nanny walked out of Daniel Whitmore's $12 million estate with shaking hands and eyes that refused to look back, making her the 27th to quit in just 3 months. And inside, the silence returned, that strange, heavy silence that seemed to breathe through the walls like the house itself was watching, because the triplets, Ethan, Noah, and Lucas, didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even argue like normal 5-year-olds. They simply observed, waited, and then things would start to go wrong in ways no one could explain. A lamp tipping over without warning, toys scattered in patterns too deliberate to be accidents, doors closing at the exact moment someone reached for them. And every nanny said the same thing before they left, that the boys weren't wild, they weren't spoiled, they were something else entirely, something that made adults feel like strangers in their own skin. And Daniel Whitmore, a man who built billion-dollar companies from nothing, stood at the top of the marble staircase watching it all through narrowed eyes, telling himself the same thing he always did, that he didn't need help, that this was temporary, that discipline would fix it. But the truth sat heavier than the silence, because he had already tried everything except the one thing he refused to face. And that morning, as sunlight cut across the polished floors and the security monitors flickered quietly in his office, a new name appeared on the list, one that didn't come through an agency, didn't come with references, just a single line written in calm, deliberate handwriting, Amara Hayes. And when she stepped through the front gate, she didn't pause, didn't hesitate, didn't even glance up at the towering mansion that intimidated everyone else. She simply walked forward like she had been there before, and something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the house itself had just noticed her. And upstairs, behind a half-closed door, 3 identical boys stopped what they were doing at the exact same second, their heads turning in perfect sync toward the sound of footsteps that didn't echo with fear. And for the first time in months, one of them whispered something no camera could fully capture, his voice low, uncertain, almost curious. She's different. Amara did not knock, she did not announce herself. She simply stepped into the house as if she understood its rhythm, her shoes quiet against the polished marble while the air seemed to tighten around her. And in the security room Daniel watched without blinking, his hand resting on the edge of the desk, as if he could feel something shifting through the screen. Because every nanny before her had hesitated at that door, had looked up, had taken a breath, but Amara did not. She walked straight in and stopped at the center of the living room where the toys were scattered in that same careful chaos, not random, never random. And she did something no one had done before. She did not pick anything up. She did not call out for the children. She simply stood there and waited, and upstairs the triplets were already moving, silent footsteps across the hardwood floor, 3 shadows slipping into position as if they had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Because this was always how it started, the test, the invisible line every adult failed to see until it was too late. Ethan reached the hallway first, Noah close behind, Lucas lingering just a step back, watching more than acting, and together they looked down at her from the second-floor railing, expecting the same reaction they had seen 27 times before, the forced smile, the nervous greeting, the attempt to take control. But Amara did not look up right away. She let the silence stretch, let it settle, until the house itself seemed to lean into it, and only then did she lift her eyes, slow and steady, meeting theirs without a single flicker of uncertainty. And something almost invisible passed between them, not fear, not authority, something else entirely, recognition. And Ethan was the first to move, a small object slipping from his hand and falling over the railing, not thrown, not dropped by accident, but released with intention, a signal, the beginning of the pattern. And it hit the floor with a sharp sound that echoed through the room, a sound that had sent others rushing, reacting, trying to regain control. But Amara did not move, not even a step. She simply glanced at it, then back at the boys, and said in a voice so calm it felt out of place, that one was planned. And the words did not accuse, did not challenge. They stated a fact, and for the first time in months, the pattern hesitated. Noah shifted his weight, Lucas narrowed his eyes slightly, and Ethan tilted his head as if trying to understand something that did not fit, because this was not how the game worked. The adults were supposed to react, to chase, to correct, But she was not playing. She was observing. And from the monitor, Daniel leaned forward just a fraction, his expression tightening, because he had seen this moment before, the beginning of the unraveling. But something was off. Something was not following the script. And then Amara did something even stranger. She walked past the fallen object without picking it up and sat down on the edge of the sofa, not in defeat, not in surrender, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what would happen next. And upstairs, for the first time, the three boys did not move in unison. And that was when Lucas whispered, almost too soft to hear, "She is watching us." Back. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the room like something alive. And Amara let it happen, her hands resting loosely in her lap, while her eyes moved once, slowly, from Ethan to Noah to Lucas, not searching, not guessing, but recognizing, and upstairs the boys felt it. That unfamiliar weight of being seen without having to act, without having to prove anything. And that was when Noah made the next move, stepping back from the railing and disappearing into the hallway, the signal shifting from visible to hidden. The second phase, the part no adult ever handled well, because this was where things became confusing, unpredictable, designed to pull attention in too many directions at once. And within seconds a soft noise echoed from the kitchen, something sliding across the counter, followed by a faint click from somewhere deeper in the house, and Daniel's eyes flicked between the security feeds, recognizing the pattern instantly, because this was where every nanny lost control, chasing one sound while missing the next, reacting instead of understanding. But Amara did not stand. She did not turn her head quickly or rush toward the noise. She simply spoke into the quiet room as if the walls themselves were listening. "You split the attention to stay unseen." And the words landed like a key turning in a lock. Because upstairs Noah froze mid-step, his hands still near the edge of the counter, while Ethan glanced toward Lucas, uncertainty flickering for the first time, and Lucas, who always watched more than he acted, felt something shift inside him that he could not name, because she was not interrupting them, she was describing them, and that was new. And slowly, almost carefully, Amara leaned forward and picked up the object Ethan had dropped earlier, not to clean it, not to fix anything, but to place it gently back onto the table where it belonged, restoring order without making a point of it. And then she added, softer this time, "You do not need to hide if no one is chasing you." And upstairs the hallway felt different, the usual tension slipping just enough to be noticed. And for a moment no one moved, no one tested, no one pushed, because the game they had mastered suddenly had no clear rules. And down in the office Daniel exhaled, without realizing he had been holding his breath, his eyes fixed on the screen as something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but recognition, because for the first time he was not watching someone manage his children, he was watching someone understand them. And then Lucas did something none of them had done in months. He stepped forward into full view, his small hand resting lightly on the railing, not to drop anything, not to test, but simply to be seen. And when Amara looked up again, she did not smile, she did not praise, she only nodded once, as if acknowledging something that had always been there waiting to be noticed. Lucas did not step back, and that was the moment everything changed, because Ethan noticed first, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to understand why his brother was no longer following the pattern. And Noah slowly returned from the kitchen, his movements quieter now, less certain, as if the house itself had stopped giving them cues, and Amara remained exactly where she was, not moving to meet them, not calling them down, but allowing the distance to exist, allowing them to choose. And for children who had always controlled the space around them, that choice felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, and Daniel leaned closer to the monitor, his fingers tightening slightly against the desk, because he had never seen hesitation in them before, not once, not in months, not since everything had started to change. And then Amara spoke again, not louder, not softer, but clearer. "You do not trust people who come into this house." And the sentence did not sound like a question, it sounded like a truth already understood, and Ethan's expression shifted just enough to confirm it. A small flicker that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but not by her, and not by Daniel watching from the screen. And for a moment no one responded, because the words had reached something deeper than the usual reactions, deeper than the patterns they repeated every day. And Amara did not fill the silence. She let it settle again, like she knew the next move would not come from her, and it did not, because Noah stepped forward next, just one step, his hand brushing lightly against the railing as if testing whether the moment would break. And when it did not, when she still did not move, he asked the first question any of them had asked in weeks, his voice small but steady. "Why are you still here?" And Daniel's breath caught in his chest, because that question had never been asked before, not to him, not to anyone. And Amara tilted her head slightly, considering it, not answering immediately, not giving them something simple to accept or reject. And then she said, "Because you are still here." And the answer did not explain anything, and yet it explained everything. And Lucas's fingers tightened, slightly on the railing, not in tension but in thought, as if he was holding on to something new, something fragile. And downstairs the room no longer felt like a space waiting to be disrupted. It felt like something was being rebuilt in silence, piece by piece, without force, without demand. And Daniel felt it too, something shifting in a place he had kept closed for a long time, because he had believed control was the answer, structure, rules, distance. But what he was seeing now did not look like control. It looked like understanding. And that realization unsettled him more than anything the boys had done before, because it suggested something he had not been willing to face. And as the three boys slowly, carefully began to move toward the stairs, not running, not testing, just walking, Daniel whispered to himself without realizing it, "What is she doing?" But deep down, he already knew the answer was not what she was doing. It was what he had never done. The sound of small footsteps on the stairs was almost too quiet to notice, but Daniel heard it, and it stopped him cold, because his sons never came down like that, not together, not without noise, not without control. Yet now Ethan stepped first, slow and deliberate, followed by Noah. Then Lucas a second behind, not in perfect sync like before, but close enough to show something had not broken, only shifted. And Amara did not stand to greet them. She did not reach out or move toward them. She simply adjusted her posture slightly, creating space instead of closing it. And that choice mattered more than any words, because for the first time the boys were not reacting. They were approaching, and when Ethan reached the last step he stopped, just out of reach, his eyes fixed on her face as if searching for the moment she would change, the moment she would become like the others. But she did not. She held his gaze without pressure, without expectation, and said quietly, "You can stay there." And the permission landed differently than any command ever had. It did not push, it did not pull, it allowed. And Noah shifted beside him, his hand brushing lightly against Ethan's arm as if asking without speaking. And Lucas remained one step higher, watching everything with that same careful attention that had always set him apart. And Daniel leaned forward again, his heartbeat slower now, but heavier, because he was not just watching his children, he was seeing something unfold that he did not understand, something he had never been able to create despite every resource, every expert, every structured plan. And then Amara did something that changed the entire room. She looked past them, not ignoring them, but including something larger, and said, "He is watching you right now." And the words moved through the space like a quiet wave, and for the first time the boys turned their heads not toward her, not toward each other, but toward the direction of the office, toward the unseen presence they had always felt but never acknowledged. And Daniel froze, because in that instant the distance he had built so carefully was no longer invisible. It was part of the room, part of the silence. And Ethan's voice came next, hesitant but clear. "Then why does he not come down?" And Daniel's hand tightened against the desk as if the question had reached through the screen, because there was no answer he could give that would not reveal everything he had been avoiding. And Amara did not answer for him. She did not soften it or redirect it. She simply said, "That is something he has to decide." And the responsibility shifted, not onto the children, not onto her, but onto him. And Daniel felt it settle in his chest like something undeniable, something he could no longer observe from a distance. And downstairs the boys stood still, not retreating, not advancing, just waiting in a way they never had before, not for control, not for instruction, but for something real. And Amara remained exactly where she was, not leading, not forcing, just holding the space open long enough for a choice to be made. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Whitmore stood up from behind his desk without knowing what he was going to say, only knowing that watching was no longer enough. The hallway felt longer than it had ever been as Daniel stepped out of his office, each footstep echoing in a house that had learned to exist without him. And for a moment he paused at the top of the stairs, not because he was unsure of the distance, but because he was unsure of himself, because everything he had built in his life had followed clear rules, clear outcomes. But this did not. This was not a negotiation, not a system he could control, and downstairs his sons were still standing, exactly where he had last seen them, not moving, not breaking the moment, as if they were holding something fragile in place. And Amara did not look up at him when he appeared. She did not acknowledge his presence immediately. She allowed him to enter the space the same way she had, without interruption, without pressure, and that made the air shift again. Because now there were 4 of them in the room, and none of them knew what the next move was supposed to be, and Daniel took one step down. Then another, his hand briefly touching the railing as if grounding himself in something familiar, and Ethan noticed first, his posture tightening slightly, but not retreating, not reverting to the patterns they had always used, and Noah followed his gaze. Then Lucas, and for the first time in months the 3 of them were not watching from above. They were standing on the same level, in the same space, and Daniel reached the bottom step and stopped, not because he was told to, but because he did not know what would happen if he moved closer, and Amara finally looked at him, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, as if she had expected this moment from the beginning. And she did not speak to him. She did not guide him. She simply held his gaze for a second before looking back at the boys, returning the focus to where it had always needed to be. And that silence forced Daniel to face something he had avoided for a long time, because there was no instruction, no script, no one telling him what to say. And then Ethan spoke again, his voice clearer now, less hesitant. "You are really here." And the words were simple, but they carried something Daniel could not ignore, because they were not asking for confirmation. They were recognizing a change, and Daniel swallowed once, his voice quieter than he expected when he answered, "Yes." And the word felt unfamiliar, like it carried more weight than anything he had said in this house before, and Noah shifted slightly, stepping half an inch closer, not enough to close the distance but enough to show he was considering it. And Lucas remained still, watching Daniel the same way he had watched Amara earlier, measuring, understanding, and Daniel realized in that moment that his sons had always been watching him, not reacting, not misbehaving, but observing, waiting, and he had never seen it. Not until now. And Amara spoke again, but not to him, to them. "You can tell him what you need." And the sentence did not demand anything. It did not create pressure, it created space, and that space was unfamiliar, because it placed the truth where it belonged, between them, not around them. And Daniel felt it settle in his chest, heavier than anything before, because for the first time he was not being asked to fix something. He was being asked to listen, and he did not know how to do that yet. But he did not step back. He did not return upstairs. He stayed exactly where he was, in the middle of a moment he could no longer avoid. The silence stretched just a little longer, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of something waiting to be said, and Daniel could feel it pressing against him from all sides, not from the walls, not from the house, but from the 3 small figures standing in front of him, because for the first time they were not creating distance, they were holding it, offering it. And Ethan took a breath that was almost too quiet to hear before speaking, his voice steady in a way that did not match his age. "You always leave." And the words landed without accusation, without anger, just a simple truth that had been repeated too many times to need emotion anymore. And Daniel felt it immediately, the weight of something he could not redirect or explain away, because there was no misunderstanding in that sentence, no confusion, just clarity, and Noah added to it, his eyes still fixed on Daniel. "And when you stay, you are not really here." And Daniel's chest tightened slightly, not from surprise, but from recognition, because he knew exactly what they meant, even if he had never allowed himself to say it out loud. And Lucas, who had been quiet the longest, stepped down the final stair, closing the distance by just a few inches, enough to change the space between them, and he said softly, "So we stopped trying." And that was the moment Daniel understood everything he had missed, not the behaviors, not the patterns, but the reason behind them, because this had never been about control, never about discipline. It had been about something much simpler and much harder to face, presence. And Amara did not interrupt. She did not soften the moment. She allowed it to unfold exactly as it was, because this was not something that could be managed or redirected. It had to be heard, fully, completely, and Daniel stood there with no immediate answer, no quick solution. Because for the first time in his life, he was not the one leading the conversation. He was the one learning how to be part of it. And the seconds stretched, not uncomfortably, but honestly, and then he did something small, something that would not have mattered in any other setting. But here it changed everything. He took one step closer, not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to show he was no longer holding on to it. And he said quietly, "I did not know how to stay." And the words were not perfect, they were not complete, but they were real, and the boys did not respond right away, because they were not looking for perfection, they were looking for truth, and Noah shifted. Again, his shoulders relaxing just slightly, while Ethan's gaze softened in a way that had not been seen in months, and Lucas watched Daniel carefully, as if measuring whether this was another moment that would disappear, and Amara finally spoke, her voice steady, grounding. "Now you do." And the sentence did not promise anything. It did not guarantee change. It simply marked the beginning of something that had not existed before. And Daniel felt it, that subtle shift from observation to participation, from distance to presence. And for the first time, the house did not feel like something he owned. It felt like something he was finally stepping into. No one moved right away, but something had already shifted, something quiet and irreversible, like a door opening without a sound. And Daniel felt it in the way his sons no longer avoided his eyes, in the way the space between them no longer felt like a barrier, but a question waiting to be answered. And for the first time, he did not try to solve it, did not reach for control or structure. He simply stayed where he was, letting the moment exist without forcing it forward. And Ethan was the first to test it, not with chaos, not with patterns, but with something smaller, something more honest. He took one step closer, slow enough that it could have been stopped at any second, but it was not. And Daniel did not step back, did not fill the space with words. He let that single step matter, and Noah followed, not because he was told to, but because the absence of pressure made the movement feel safe. And Lucas watched them both before finally stepping forward as well, closing the distance in a way they had not done in months. And the room felt different now, not quieter, but clearer, as if something heavy had finally been named and no longer needed to hide in the background. And Amara remained still, her presence steady but unobtrusive, because this part was not hers to lead. It never had been, and Daniel realized that too, that whatever was happening now was not something she was giving them. It was something she had helped them uncover, something that had always been there waiting for him to see it. And he lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling, not performing, but adjusting just enough to meet them closer to their level. And that small change did not go unnoticed, because Ethan's expression softened in a way that carried more meaning than any words, and Noah's shoulders dropped just a fraction, tension releasing in a way that had not happened before. And Lucas, who had always watched the longest, finally spoke again, his voice quiet but certain. "Are you going to stay this time?" And the question did not demand a promise. It simply asked for truth, and Daniel felt it settle inside him, heavier than anything else that had been said, because this was not about one moment, not about this conversation. It was about everything that came after, and for the first time he did not look for the right answer. He looked for the honest one, and he said, "Yes, I am." Not perfectly, not with certainty of what that would require, but with the understanding that staying was no longer something he could define later. It had to begin now, and the boys did not rush toward him, did not react in a way that would make the moment easier. They simply stood there, taking in the words, measuring them the way they always had. But this time there was no need to test, no need to break the moment to see if it would hold, because something about it already felt different. And Amara finally shifted slightly, just enough to stand, her movements quiet, almost unnoticed, and she looked at Daniel one last time, not for approval, not for recognition, but as if confirming something had been set in motion. And then she turned her attention back to the boys, her voice calm, grounding. "You can show him how." And the words were simple, but they carried a quiet power, because they placed the next step not in control, not in correction, but in connection. And Daniel understood that without needing it explained. because for the first time he was not trying to lead the moment, he was ready to follow it. For a moment, no one spoke, but the space between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt like something being built in real time, fragile but real, and Ethan was the one who moved first, not with hesitation this time, but with intention, stepping closer until the distance between him and Daniel was no longer measured in feet, but in something far more difficult to define. And he looked up, not searching for permission, not testing, just looking, and said quietly, "Then stay here." And the simplicity of it struck deeper than anything before, because it was not a request for promises or plans, it was a request for presence, for now, for this moment. And Daniel understood that without needing it explained, and instead of answering with words, he did something even smaller, even more important. He stayed exactly where he was, not reaching for his phone, not glancing away, not filling the silence, just staying. And no one noticed it immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly as if confirming something he had not been able to trust before. And Lucas took another step forward, his movements careful but no longer guarded, and slowly, almost naturally, the three boys formed a quiet line in front of Daniel, not in formation, not in habit, but in something that felt like alignment. And Amara watched from the side, her expression unchanged, because this was not a moment to guide or interrupt. It was a moment to witness, and Daniel felt the weight of their attention settle on him, not as pressure, but as expectation, not for perfection, but for consistency. And that realization grounded him more than anything else had, because for the first time he understood that what they needed was not something he could deliver once. It was something he had to choose again and again. And Ethan's voice came again, softer now, almost certain, "You did not leave." And Daniel shook his head slightly, not dramatically, just enough to confirm it. And Noah exhaled a breath he had been holding without realizing it, his shoulders relaxing further as if something inside him had finally loosened. And Lucas, still watching closely, did something none of them had done before. He stepped close enough to reach out, then paused, not because he was afraid, but because he was choosing. And Daniel did not move to close that final gap. He let Lucas decide, and after a second that felt longer than it should have, Lucas placed his hand lightly against Daniel's arm, not gripping, not testing, just touching. And that small contact carried more meaning than any of the chaos that had filled this house before. And Daniel felt it, not as a surprise, but as something he had been missing, without knowing how to name it. And he did not pull away, did not overreact. He simply let it be. And that was enough. And Amara shifted her gaze slightly, not toward them, but toward the space around them, as if recognizing that the house itself no longer felt tense, no longer waiting for something to break, but instead holding something steady. And she spoke one last time, her voice quiet but certain, "Now they know you can stay." And Daniel looked at her briefly, understanding more in that sentence than in anything else she had said, because it was not about this moment. It was about what came next. And as he turned his attention back to his sons, he realized something that unsettled him in the best possible way. This was only the beginning, and for the first time, he was not afraid of what that meant.